joining this, our campaign online briefing, Audio 2022. I'm Austin Allison. I'm the editor of Campaign Middle East, and I hope you all know what Campaign is, unless you stumbled in here by accident, in which case, congratulations. But here's a reminder, as we're all little Ramadan adults these days, Campaign is the main resource for the Middle East media, marketing, advertising, and brand communications industry. We have a website, campaignme.com. We have a newsletter, which you can sign up to on the website. I'd advise doing that. Make sure you subscribe to see how to get involved, as well as what's going on in general. We're active on social media. We have events and webinars like this one, and podcasts. And there's the magazine that started it all. The next issue of the magazine is out in a couple of weeks, and it contains our annual TV guide. It also contains our annual Faces to Watch issue, where we showcase some of the young talents that's likely to lead the agency side of the industry in years to come. So do keep an eye out for that at the end of this month, April. And the issue after that, out at the end of May, has a focus on radio and audio. So if you like what you hear today, do keep your eyes peeled for that in about 6 weeks. Thanks, as always, to our sponsor for this event, DMS, who I'm sure you all know. DMS is the digital arm of Choueiri Group. It's the largest local media representative company in MENA. It's distinguished for being the voice of independent publishers in the region. DMS has grown to represent more than 20 market-leading publishers across key verticals, including video, female, news, sports, lifestyle, music and entertainment. They're the exclusive representative of Anghami, which is the leading audio streaming platform in the region, and the first Arab tech company to be listed on the NASDAQ. And together, DMS and Anghami brought digital audio to the region a decade back, and since then they've contributed to shaping the digital audio scene. You'll be hearing a bit more from them later. Audio is, of course, a hot topic at the moment, with Anghami listing on the stock exchange in New York and regional podcast networks securing rounds of funding. There's international interest in the business of the Middle East's audio industry. Radio ad revenues may have taken a hit during COVID, but people are doing a lot of listening. We've grown tired of our screens and we're looking for other ways to consume content, away from our phones, away from our laptops, away from our TVs. From streaming services to audiobooks to podcasts to good old radio, listening formats are multiplying and evolving, and our devices are even listening to us, just as we listen to them. Think of Siri on your phone, or Amazon's Alexa, which is now available in Khaliji Arabic. There's a lot to listen out for, and more than we can cover in 2 short panels. But we're going to take a look at some of the most exciting aspects of audio. Our second panel, coming up in about 40 minutes, is going to be well worth sticking around for. It's all about podcasts, Arabic language podcasts in particular, and it will be hosted by marketeers Cheryl King, who's going to be joined by representatives of 2 of the region's leading podcast networks. If you have even the slightest interest in the communication power of podcasts across the region, from Saudi to Egypt, to the UAE to Jordan, I doubt there's been a more knowledgeable panel put together on the topic. And our first panel is going to take a different look at audio. It's, what's happening to my screen? I'm going to take a different look at audio. It's going to look at how regional advertisers are using the different facets of digital audio. I'm going to stop talking in a minute, and I'm going to start listening, which is what this is all about. So I'd like to hand over to our first panel, which is Carl Shaloub, who is Anghami UAE Senior Sales Manager at DMS. He's going to be our moderator. Hey, Carl. And
hey, Austin.
We'll be joined by Maha Najam, who is the Marketing Manager at Volkswagen Middle East. Hey, Maha. Diwan Afzal, who is the Digital and Media Manager, Consumer Products Division at L'Oreal Middle East. Hey, Diwan. And by Melissa Kanan, who is Galaxy's Marketing Manager at Mars. Now, I'm going to hand over to you, Carl. Take it away.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you. Nice intro as well. So it's a very nice of Campaign to dedicate this digital audio webinar because it's a bit, so to put everyone a bit into context. So DMS and Anghami brought digital audio to the region like a decade back, and the excitement is still there because there's still a lot to do. Things have evolved a lot, but as you can see, there's always new initiatives. This scene is very particular because the room for creativity and for improvement is huge, and we keep adapting and coming up with new initiatives that will eventually serve better the advertisers, so for them to reach and to talk to their consumers. And yeah, the involvement was very fast, specifically with the pandemic, like you mentioned. So the accessibility to multiple devices. So I mean, for example, we partner with Fitbit, we partner with Alexa and so on, but also the off-screen experience that is quite unique. So this increased the penetration drastically during the pandemic. So today, according to Ipsos, there is around 70% penetration in UAE, 60% in Saudi. And by Q2 of next year, so we should be at 65% in Saudi, and also the time spent by user will average an hour and a half. So that's according to work. So yeah, it's growing very fast in terms of adoption. But at the same time, there is a lot of new things that are being created, a lot of new facets, because this is the topic today. So if we go back a bit in time, it was an audio pre-roll, and even on an audio pre-roll, we looked at different things to improve it. So we even started doing like immersive audio ads to create a certain experience, dynamic audio ads, and so on. But also we started looking at music creation, Sonic, we're gonna talk a lot about them. And also podcasts, which is the hype now, but also digital concert and so on. So audio is very vast, a lot of different facets, aspects, and I'm very, very happy to be joined by Diwan, Maha, and Melissa, because there are advertisers that are multinational first, so they have a global perspective, but also a local perspective. They kept on challenging us, and I think this is how we're shaping all together the audio scene. So yeah, I'm gonna start jumping straight into it. And the first question will be, so, and again, I'm quoting a bit IAB here. They say that our brains process sounds better than any other sense, which is true, right? It's a bit science. So question to the panelists. Do you have a sound for your brand, and what value does it bring? And I think I'm gonna start with Maha from Volkswagen, with this global Sonic that you have. So just if you can tell us a bit more about it.
Thank you, Carl. So like you rightly said, sounds are very important to us. And this is why as humans, it's very easy for us to memorize songs, and many at the same time. Like as soon as we hear that first tune of a specific song, we know what's coming up and we start singing along. And it applies the same when it comes to sonics of specific brands. For example, the global brand I could think of that has a nice sound logo is McDonald's. Like who doesn't imagine the yellow M whenever you hear I'm loving it. In terms of our brand and our sound logo, it is also very important for us to use it across our assets globally and locally. It is actually part of our guidelines, and we have a heavy focus on the sound element, as it is as important as the other elements we use throughout our communications. The Volkswagen brand sound specifically enables listeners to experience the ethos of a brand and the tonalities that we want to bring out, which is being a bit like human across our communications that we put out in order to resonate to our target audience. This is why you might notice globally and locally, we have a female VO at the end as well to bring that human element, just like Siri and Alexa are using as well.
Yeah, very interesting, Maha. And yeah, I think, like you said, there is a sort of adaptation, and we'll come to that. Just wanted to hear, so this is from a Noto brand, right, auto industry. I just wanted to hear a bit more from the CPG end. Maybe Melissa, if you can tell us a bit more. By the way, congratulations, you won the background contest for today's panel. And if you can tell us a bit from Galaxy's standpoint, what sounds mean to you and what are the values basically?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Carl. And I think I'm going to add on to what Maha was saying earlier. I do think it's extremely important because having a sound for the brand is part of driving its memory structure, right? So in fact, also like thinking of what Maha was mentioning, some of the best brands globally employ sonics to drive memory structures. Yet when I think actually of the brands I worked on, or the current brand I lead, which is Galaxy, I realized that I tend to imagine the sound of the brand more than actually have one, because when you take on a new brand, you always get handed a very nice, thorough visual identity for the brand, the color, the size, you know, the font. But I can't recall of a time where I actually got handed an audio identity. So in the case of Galaxy, I would imagine, you know, the brand sound to be, you know, dynamic, vibrant, positive, upbeat, you know, confident, lots of energy. It just mimics kind of the visual identity of the brand, which is actually exactly what we tried to achieve, or what we wanted to achieve with I Choose, or Ana Akhtar, which is what you see actually right behind me, which is a song that we just launched a few months ago in partnership with Anghami, and which actually became the voice of the brand. So for me, that would be the sound of Galaxy, or the way I would describe it.
And Diwan from L'Oréal's and CPD, Garnier specifically I have in mind, but if you have others as well.
No, I was going to choose Garnier, honestly, because I think it has out of our 4 mass brands, it has the strongest history of innovating in terms of audio in the region. And I would answer really by going to the core values of the brand itself. So Garnier, for us, the number 1 value is sustainability. So Garnier is the champion of green beauty. We take a super amount of pride, you know, leading this topic in the region with plastic recycling, sustainable sourcing, etc. So in order to lead on a very future forward topic like that, the sound of the brand has to be innovative because you're really charting the future, I would say. And the second core value of the brand is inclusivity. So, you know, it's a brand for everyone, really speaking to real people with real beauty problems and providing real beauty solutions. So it has to be a sound that's authentic. And I think our partnership with Anghami that we did, you know, really pushing to find the right partner, the right creator that can capture this tone and translate, let's say, the global core values into a regional context. These are the things that we are looking for, and delivered very strongly.
Yeah, thanks, Johan. And I think, yeah, so we talked a lot about, so the 3 of you talked about adaptability, how to speak and have your audience relate to what you're doing, right, with your sounds and the identity that you want to convey. So, and according to, I'm going to read a bit of stats here, according to Work, so in UAE, 64% of millennials and 46% of Gen Z have used music to discover cultures and experiences. And this is what drives usually relatability, relevancy, and so on. So we'll start with music, right? So we talked about the sonic, but can you tell us a bit more how you localize certain sounds by using music, and also what is the thing that you're looking for in this region particularly? Because I think this is one of the first things that differ from global, right? So music is something very big in this region, and it's a driver of a lot of things. So just tell us a bit more. So so Melissa, because again, you mentioned the I Choose and Akhtar. So if you can tell us a bit more about it.
Sure, and actually that's a very interesting question, Carl. I think while I believe that the world has actually become a global village, I also believe in the power of localization and really being locally relevant. So I Choose, or Ana Akhtar, was briefed to be an anthem made by Arab women for Arab women. And we wanted to make sure that we live by this. So we actually went ahead and chose a partner from the region, so Anghami, to help us develop the song, you know, and make sure that we're true to the cultural cues of the, you know, region. We partner with an uprising, very young pop singer in Saudi, Zena Imad, to carry the voice of the brand. And we turned the song into a music video through the eyes of a Lebanese music video director. Her name is Angie Jamal. So really, that's what we really wanted to deliver through localization. And the moment actually the song launched, it was picked up by consumers. And first, because the tune was very catchy and celebratory, you know, and upbeat, but it also resonated very well with them in terms of messaging, because the song had a lot of very uplifting messages, such as believing in yourself, being proud of who you are, choosing to be who you want to be, which is in line with the Galaxy purpose of, you know, empowering the next generation of women to have more pleasure than the last. So this ended up being highly leveraged beyond our original media plan. So we were actually present on very relevant channels like Rotana, or programs like, I think the more recent one was House of Talents on NBC as well. And I think this was the power of relocalization. It's the way it was picked up, the way it resonated, the way it was actually also consumed. So yeah, that's the experience on Galaxy.
So interesting. So you created this this voice or sound, and it cascaded it across many other things, right? And I think, yeah, knowing what we did a bit with Diwan, so Diwan for Garnier, what was exactly the, so how did you localize it? There are different things that you did from what Melissa did with Galaxy. So if you can tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, so I think I'll touch a bit on our approach to localization. So me personally, I was born and raised in Saudi, and in that country specifically, the regional dialects of Arabic are really the core of the culture. You know, you have Najdi Arabic from the center region, you have Hijazi Arabic from the western region. So without understanding these nuances, you cannot make an impact in the culture or really resonate. And for us, I mean, we're a consumer insights-driven company obsessed with understanding the perspective of the consumer. So unless you crack the language, you cannot speak to them in the right tone of voice, with the right phrases or the right approach at all. So this is kind of the lens with which we look at the landscape, and so it becomes non-negotiable. Now, how do we navigate that landscape? Is through the partnerships. I think Melissa touched on that strongly. So our partnership with Anghami and the creators that you linked us up with, it's just a matter of trust. From our side, we have a super strong marketing teams on all of the brands that really embody the core values. And then they collaborate with the partners to know that, you know, through this back and forth into the very late hours of the night, we'll eventually arrive at an approach that, you know, expresses our core values in a way that resonates with the local audience. So I think it's trust and collaboration, really.
I actually would like to agree with both Diwan and Melissa, and similar to what they were saying as well, is adapting and localizing the content that we get from our Germany team, for example, is very important. And this is something that we live by. Everything we do needs to resonate to this region. So an example that's very similar to what Melissa was saying, we did a T-Rock campaign recently where the whole concept was about being born confident. So we wanted to localize this concept. So we worked with the first female gamer and the first female DJ in KSA to basically bring this concept to life of being brave, being confident, and doing what you set your mind to. And basically it was really relatable in the region because people connected to those talents that we worked with. And that's very important.
Yeah, very interesting. And so here, so again, so you're tapping into different cultures, and cultures differ a lot. So Diwan said it, in Saudi, there are different segments, right? Different segments, different culture, different values. So it will come to my next question, and it's more about the granularity of things, right? So music, so music streaming platform, audio streaming platform in general, they can give a lot of granular data. So it can be real-time contextual, they can understand certain culture, you can reach the user off screen within certain moods, certain activities, and so on. So the first party data, so to go back to this will come at every panel, I think. So the first party data of an audio streaming platform is usually very rich, right? And I wanted to see how your brands are leveraging those from an audio perspective. What is the partnership that you're looking for, specifically that we have CPG brands and auto brands? So I think it will be maybe different perspective, but just to hear more about what your brands are looking in terms of partnership and first party data.
Yeah, so two keywords here that we need to focus on is accuracy in real time. Unlike traditional audio channels, the accuracy that you get in terms of data from online platforms and music streaming platforms are very important and very detailed. For example, we did partner up with Anghami this year as well, because we saw that it allowed us to tap into the specific target audience that we want to reach per campaign and per model specifically in our case. So the partner that is able to provide us with this information, as well as real-time insights and information for us to optimize our campaigns and budgets accordingly, are the partners that we actually look to work with hand in hand to achieve our KPIs with everything we do. And then in terms of relevancy of the content that we do or the reach, and this is where there's going to be a contradiction possibly between, you know, our brand and our approach versus, you know, what Melissa and Diwan might have to say, is because from our side we look into relevancy over reach. Of course, there has to be a good balance between both. You cannot have relevant content that does not reach anyone, as well as you cannot reach everyone and not, you know, set an important message or send that message across. So we look into having this balance, but from my opinion and from like our experience, relevancy in terms of content is very important for us to focus on, because we believe that if we reach the right audience and we, you know, lock that message that they saw, then, you know, they're most likely to remember us as a brand and what we have to say for them.
Yeah, great. And the first bullet was shot, right? so just on that, and to add a bit to what Diwan and Melissa said earlier. So again, we're eager to hear from a CPG standpoint when you would leverage relevancy over context, over reach, sorry, if you do it, but also going back a bit into the conversation, how you tap into different cultures. There is already a certain granularity here. So what is your approach usually when it comes to context versus reach or relevancy versus reach? Diwan, if you want to start.
So I love the question about first-party data in the context of audio, because we treat it as a bit more precious when it comes from an audio platform because of the word that you said, mood. You know, on a music streaming platform, you reach the customer in a very unique environment. It's deeply curated, highly immersive, because they've chosen normally the artist, they've chosen the song. So the interruption that the ad creates has to be justified. And that's why we were looking really for a partnership that would deliver a granularity for us to know exactly who we're speaking to, what tone we need to speak to them in, and really anticipate their beauty needs. And the visibility that we appreciated from the Anghami collaboration is the potential to understand the purchasing power of the consumer. This was not a lens that we even had on some of our video platforms. So it really was, you know, on point to what we were trying to do in an audio space. And when it comes to, if I can answer the second part in the same shot, I won't say that reach is not our obsession for the vast majority of our campaigns, but at L'Oréal, we're very lucky to work on brands that have a deep sense of purpose and support specific causes with media. So I referenced the Green Beauty on Garnier, and on L'Oréal Paris, we have a cause where we basically for people to stand up against street harassment. And when we do these campaigns, it's completely contextual. The only aim is to reach the consumers and the users who are as passionate about these projects and these causes as us. So of course, reach doesn't factor in, and it's completely about you know, finding those really unique ambassadors that care about these values as much as we do.
Melissa, anything to add here?
Yeah, I can add to that. So I think very similar to what you once said, for us, basically it's reach first. So at Mars, we believe in reaching a right target audience both efficiently and effectively. In most cases, especially in the case of chocolate, we need to deliver that relevant reach at scale with obviously the right brand safety measures, which always come into play. And this is delivered via a combination of media solutions, including audio, 100%. But whatever media first-party data is part of this, like in the moment, like in the example of moment consumption, for example, or targeting, we obviously always ensure compliance in protecting people's privacy on that front. So yeah, very similar to I think what Diwan was sharing as well from our side.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you one small thing regarding that. So you've created your you've leveraged somehow the granularity of things on audio by creating the songs, whether with Galaxy or with Garnier and Maha. So I think it's more into tapping into specific moments and leveraging those moments. So maybe commuting and so on. So different aspect. But usually when you create a song, how do you amplify it usually? So it's something that would live beyond a music platform. So, and I know for a fact that it was a bit the case. If you can just tell us a bit about it. So Diwan and Melissa. When it comes to getting the reach out of the song, for example.
Of course, because at the end of the day, what we look to with the creators is to give us an asset that resonates, and then we amplify that across our campaigns. So when we did upper funnel campaigns on the video platforms, the audio track was the one that we developed together in our partnership. So really, that's where you get the reach, and then it kind of connects the entire consumer journey and the experience overall. So that's a very easy tactical solution, I would say.
I think just to build on that, for us, it also starts at the briefing stage, right? Because at the briefing stage, we have both our media partners and our creative partners part of the briefing, moment and session. Because we always want to ensure that whatever content we're creating, it's serving the right media channels, and whatever media channels we're actually having are serving basically the relevant content. So this is definitely how we also serve kind of the reach agenda, because we need to make sure they work hand in hand, and we create some really fit for platform content for all of the media channels that we want to be part of.
All right. The next question is it's an interesting question. I think will be a nice opening also for the next webinar. So it's around podcasts. So I think we talked a bit about music, right? Music is communal, so you can bring together a certain community around the culture, a movement, or anything. So there is a lot of potential there. It's shared, people connect, and so on. And also there is a lot of granularity in the targeting and so on. There is another form of audio that delivers on that, and that is podcasts. So, and according to the first research on podcasts, so we're a bit behind compared to the US. There, I think in terms of ad spend, we're at $1.6 billion per year. So that was the figures of last year. So we're still behind in terms of brand adopting podcasts, but at the same time, it's a very unique storytelling format. It's very credible. But is it only a hype for the region? What differs us from the US? And in your view, what is missing on podcasts? Okay, for brands like Volkswagen, L'Oreal, Galaxy to jump on it. If we can start with Diwan.
You know what? I think it might be just a matter of time, because I think our circumstances are very unique. So we have in the region, we have a super young population that grew up in a context where video content creation and consumption was exploding unlike anywhere else in the world. And I think we're in a culture where bigger is better and more is not enough. But I think over time, as trust and authenticity become the currency of content, podcasts will create a unique space that brands have to be a part of. So I think it will get there. We're not there yet, and it's something that we constantly challenge our partners in our media agency on. But yeah, we feel the relevancy coming, I would say.
Definitely, and it has been picking up in the past couple of years, because people are looking, to hear more other people's thoughts about topics that they're interested in. But like you rightly said, Diwan, I think we're still not there, especially that because podcasts are really credible. So from a brand perspective, we need to be very careful how we approach that.
Absolutely.
And I completely agree with both, Diwan and Maha. I think for me, timing is a big point of view. So it's all about timing. Is it the right time today for brands to play in the space? I'm not sure it is. And I think one thing I wanted to add is that the reality is we don't know much about podcasts in the region. So we don't have much data on basically, so what is the size of the channel? What is its growth? How are people actually consuming podcasts? What's working? What's not working? What's resonating with them? So before we actually decide to go for it, it's really, really important for us to understand what is the point of entry for this platform and how are we going to play in this platform. And I think this is where it's a bit premature at this stage for us to be talking about podcast presence for brands, at least in my opinion.
Oh, very interesting. I'm taking notes actually, but on that point, and this reminds me a bit of audio, where it used to be like 6-7 years ago. So it was a bit something new, right? And in this region particularly, and creative agency, media agency, everyone was trying to adapt to this new format. And from our end, we're kind of preaching and educating the market on the power of audio and what audio can do. And now, of course, things evolve very quickly, and we're seeing the conversation is much more mature from again, if you want an audio streaming platform standpoint with the advertiser, the creative agency, and the media agency. So they understand what is there to leverage, and as per your conversation now. But my question is, where does audio stand today in the creative planning process? So is it something that you consider on each activation, each campaign? Is there a specific space for audio in your strategy, or is it something that eventually will be kind of like video assets that will be developed always on? So every activation, we need to have our video asset. Is audio gonna get there, and where it stands today among your creative planning strategies and so on? Melissa, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I can talk about actually the case of I Choose, for example, or Ana Akhtar. We knew exactly what we wanted to do. So we wanted to create the first female empowerment anthem made by Arab women for Arab women. So we couldn't think of a better partner than Anghami. So we went straight to them and we rallied the entire team and partners to deliver on this. But that was in the case of that specific kind of, campaign. If we think besides that, when we talk about the creative planning process, and I mean, if you ask me this question a few years back, I would say audio barely made it to our creative planning process as a priority. But today we think omni-channel, right? So brands like to follow consumers wherever they are. So if the consumers are listening to radio or streaming it on the app, obviously brands should be there, which is why our creative briefing process always starts, as I was mentioning earlier, with creative and media partners together hand in hand, because we always need to make sure that they're both serving the same agenda, right? So whatever content we're creating needs to have a hosting kind of media channel, and the other way around. So this is where audio now makes it as part of our briefing process. And when it basically starts there, then the end in mind is always kind of, addressed in that sense.
Yeah, and it's funny that I remembered an example a couple of years back when I was still at the agency working at the Volkswagen account. I remember pushing to put like our audio ads on Anghami, and I remember at that time I faced a bit of difficulty convincing the client. And now when I look back at it, I realized that it was very important for us to actually consider and learn from as we go throughout the years, because this year we really put focus into audio and music streaming platforms as part of our strategy that we were planning for earlier this year. For example, in our case, we partnered up with Anghami for the full year, and specifically under the safety pillar, because Anghami launched the auto car mode earlier this year as well. So we did different audio assets with them, the playlist, just to keep that audio aspect also running. And this is what we're going to be following throughout the year with this partnership. And it makes me very happy remembering how it was a few years back versus now, and the importance of audio right now, because I do believe that a sound or an audio can make or break your content.
Yeah, I remember a bit about that. So we used to receive a lot of radio spot back then, and we had to explain. So it's not the same. There is it's a different platform, right? So you need to adapt your audio to the platform, and yeah, and also there is a lot of creativity involved. So between the immersive ads, between if you want the contextual relevancy and being native to certain context and environment on the platform and so on. And so, so yeah, it goes back a bit to the granularity and how to leverage it creative wise. And yeah, and Diwan, from your end, so.
It's very similar to what, it's very similar to what Mahan and Melissa have said, but I think internally we have across our brands a kind of mandate to have a visual language that is consistent across the globe. But the audio language is what we're really cooking, let's say, locally. And you saw that very clearly with the Garnier Ultra Doux Open Squeeze Scoop campaign that we collaborated on together with Anghami, to the extent where the audio track actually became the framework around which we built the visual assets for our social media, campaign. So audio first, I would say, in a regional context for sure. If not, at par, more than that actually.
Yeah, glad to hear that. But is it on a campaign level? Because again, Garnier, this is...
Yeah, very much. Yeah. I mean, It's across all the brands. So to give you context, we've developed already in Q1 alone 5 local songs for our campaigns, and there are a few more in the pipeline. So it's very much really the first box that we try to tick when we determine our regional approach.
Yeah, perfect. And goes back again to the debate between context and reach, because like you said, it can be amplified. It's something that can be used across social, across any other platform. So yeah, I think we made a lot of progress on that since the past 5 years, 5-6 years. Yeah, so to wrap up, and I think so we discussed a bit the potential of songs and music, so how it can tap into different culture, different experiences, creating sort of a social movement. It can also tap into specific moments. And also it can have like sort of a functional aspect also that you can deliver and convey on. And then we talked a bit about podcasts. So podcasts, we still have a lot of work to do from our end, but also from your end as well, because again, there is maybe a potential to jump on it as an early bird and benefit from that, because there are a lot of topics that are still untapped. And then we talk a bit about the creative aspect and yeah, so where it stands. So it's something that we're seeing more and more, and we're glad about that, because it helps us also. The fact that certain advertisers know what they want now in the audio scene helps us, because you challenge us a lot, and we create new initiative accordingly. So my last question would be about the future of audio. So I told you first party data is something that will come at every webinar. The second word is metaverse. So metaverse is now the hype, and we started looking a bit into certain. So we're starting seeing globally certain audio solution in the metaverse world. Also, there is NFT, and Rami, we started doing it last year actually, and we tapped into NFT. There is also a lot of other things like digital concerts with the pandemic. So we started seeing more and more digital concerts. So the space is still big, and there is a lot to leverage and a lot to discover, basically. So I wanted to ask you, what is on your wish list for the future on audio? I'm gonna choose Diwan first.
Sure. I think what we benefit from on our brand is a really fantastic ecosystem that pushes us to test and learn. So topics like the metaverse, NFTs, they're being handled on a global level, and then they cascade a very clear strategy that we can feed with our local insights, etc. But we also rely a lot on our corporate digital team at L'Oréal Middle East, who you know quite well as well, Carl, and they're very obsessed with the online plus offline experience, and a bit what Melissa said for her campaign. How do we really take the experience and amplify it and maximize it across all different touch points and make something that feels immersive, cohesive, and really memorable at the end of the day? And music lends itself to that, right? Of course, because one of the deepest connections you have is experiencing music in person. So to make this link and a seamless journey is really our priority going forward. And then we have our fantastic media partner, Universal Media, who opens our eyes to new opportunities. And I think 8D is something very interesting that we're thinking about, because it's practically the AR. What AR is to the visual language is what we're considering 8D to be in terms of immersiveness. So I would say those are the ones that we're going to experiment with. And then, of course, whatever you tell me, Carl, you know, the trust is always there to explore.
We're getting ready. We're getting ready for a lot of new things. So yeah, open your ears. Maha, any word on that?
Yeah, just like Diwan said, we live by the culture of testing and learning, and this is something that we really look into with everything that's happening in the new technologies and upcoming ideas that are coming up. We are definitely ready to test and learn as we go. So open to any ideas that you have, Carl.
Pressure on me. Melissa.
I mean, I completely agree with both Diwan and Maha. I think like every new platform, there's an adoption phase where people and brands will take the time to experience, test and learn. That's, I think, the golden kind of, phrase. So I think, I'm not sure we would venture into this at this stage because it's not yet fully at scale, but I think we're open to test and learn, and while we continue to focus on our priority choices overall.
All right, and last very brief question. So usually it's open for a regional brand to test and learn, or usually it's a mandate that comes from global maybe. So is it something that you have flexibility on, or not really? You prefer to see what happened globally and then adapt it regionally. So Melissa on that. Oh, Maha, sorry.
Maha, go ahead.
That's fine. Just as a Middle East market, I think we have the advantage of, testing and learning directly from our side without really, getting the consent from global. Of course, once we want to roll it out, we always do share that with them in terms of the idea and what we plan to do. But I think because our region is relatively smaller to others, we have that flexibility to do so.
All right. Melissa, you wanted to add anything, I think?
No, I mean, similarly to what Maha said, I mean, again, I think this is a completely new space that's also very global. It's not necessarily a very regional specific kind of space that we need to venture in. So I think I would like to see also how we're going to test and learn as well this globally versus only regionally. Unless there's a regional leg that comes out of it, this is where I think we get the flexibility. But yeah, I mean, as I said, I think I'm not sure we'd venture into this at this stage until it's fully at scale. But yeah, I mean, we're obviously open to how things are going to move, because things actually change really fast in today's world. So we don't know what tomorrow is going to hold.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it for this panel. Austin, over to you. And thank you very much, all three of you, and thank you for everyone that is listening to this webinar.
Honestly, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, guys. That's amazing. It's really interesting to. I mean, I've got loads of notes, but I mean, some of the things I sort of picked up there was it's really interesting to see how marketers are using data to match the mood of their audience, and also how you're saying sort of audio is moving up in the priority and sophistication. It's really like these are really fun topics to look at, because we're sort of at the, maybe not at the birth of audio. I mean, that was 100 years ago with radio, but it's really transforming at a great time. So yeah, thanks a lot, Carl and Maha and Diwan and Melissa. That's yeah. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to talk to you, but if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can. So I'll bid you farewell and start to introduce the next panel now. Thanks a lot, guys. Because one of the things that you were speaking about there, one of the things first time I was talking about was podcasting. So, and it was interesting to hear, I think it was Maha was saying that we don't, some don't know enough about it as like media as a platform, and there's still sort of a lot of research to be done into podcasting. But luckily, I do know some people who know more than most of us about podcasting, and you're going to get to meet them in just a minute. So our second panel, Behind the Mic, is going to look at the state and the future of particularly Arab language podcasting. So I'm really excited to hear about this, because I'm not an Arabic speaker. So I know that podcasting in Arabic is absolutely booming, but I don't know exactly how. And I'm not sure how marketers are, what the best ways are for marketers to get on that. So, but these guys who are coming up are going to tell us about that, and tell us what's happening and how to get on board. So I'd like to welcome, first of all, Cheryl King, who's the moderator, and she is the managing director of Marketeers. I think many of you know Cheryl. She's one of my go-tos for all things podcast and audio related. And she's joined in this panel by Ramzi Testel, who is the CEO and co-founder of Sout Media, based in Jordan, and Greg Kalai, who is the business associate at Kerning Cultures. Both Sout and Kerning Cultures are leading regional podcast networks, and these guys know a lot about this. So I'm going to absolutely sign over now, and Cheryl, take it away.
Thanks so much, Austin, and thank you everyone as well. I really enjoyed the last session as well. It was brilliant to hear everyone's thoughts as well, and interesting questions actually were raised. I know they touched a little bit on podcasts with Dewan talking about the trust and the currency of content, and podcasting being very much part of that. It We also talked about the sophistication of audio as well. And also they did touch upon whether it was too early for brands to be entering the podcast space. Well, I have a feeling my next panelist may well disagree with that one, but we'll have a little chat about this one shortly. But just wanted to set the scene first of all. Arabic podcast content we're focusing on. I'm looking at this through someone who's in the business of podcasting, but also who's very interested in the consumer of podcasts. Obviously, like Austin, I don't speak Arabic, but through the lens of a Western expat that's been living in the UAE for 8 years now, I'm fascinated about the opportunities when it comes to Arabic content, when it comes to how that's being embraced through audio and through podcasting. So I'll introduce you to my two very awesome guests. They're from some of the biggest podcast networking companies in the region. But just before I do that, I just wanted to set a bit of the scene and to build a bit on what Austin was saying. I think there's no doubt that podcasts have exploded the last few years. 4.4 billion podcasts were downloaded last year globally. They are enjoying a bit of a renaissance, but it's a trend, it's a fashion, but it's a fashion that I believe is definitely here to stay. You only have to look at the region as well to see the huge buzz around podcasting, with lots of brands very interested to be the kind of front runners when it comes to podcasts as well. Our own research shows that 1.6 million people in the UAE alone tune into podcasts at least once a week. And also as well, when it comes to Saudi, 1 in 4 women actually listen to podcasts at least once a week as well. So these are defined as our kind of regular podcast listeners. Globally, podcasting has been up during the pandemic. According to an article by Forbes, podcasting in the US was up 18% in the pandemic alone. But a little bit closer to home, when it comes to podcasting in Arabic, now a third of podcasts actually produced are now in Arabic, which is really interesting to see. So clearly, I think over the pandemic, especially, there's been a big kind of focus on local content produced by the region, from the region, by people who are living in the region. So I don't know if there's a sort of rejection of internationally based podcasts in favor of the local content, but clearly there's an appetite. So we're going to be talking in this session about the opportunities when it comes to Arabic podcast content. How do you navigate that scene? And when it comes to communications and brand professionals, what are the opportunities for brands? Are they a trusted medium? Should brands be getting involved? And what do we need to know about it? Well, to tell me more about this and to shed some light on it, I'm really excited to introduce you to two amazing speakers. I'd love to introduce you to two of the biggest and most influential podcast networking companies in the region. We have Ramzy Tesdell, who's the CEO and co-founder of Sowt, a leading digital and audio media company producing high quality premium content focusing on Arabic speaking audiences. And also Greg Kalai, who is the business associate from Kerning Cultures, and Kerning Cultures Network, the first venture funded podcast company in the Middle East. So welcome, gentlemen, delighted to have you here.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, thanks. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about the first sort of scene setting question. A third of podcasts in the region are delivered in Arabic. That points to quite a big demand, but could you chat us through what is the demand for Arabic podcast content? You know, what are the listener figures like? Is there a lot of demand from consumers to be listening to content in Arabic language? Perhaps I can ask that question first to Ramzy.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks for having us, and it's good to see more interest in audio, obviously. And I think we're at the very beginning, like the previous panel suggested. I like to liken it to when you're taxiing in the plane, and right before the pilot punches the engines and you get thrown back into your seat. We're right at that moment, I think, with podcasts. I think we're just at the very beginning in Arabic podcast. And I think if you look at the last couple of years, you've seen that hockey stick growth of just simply numbers, the numbers of podcasts in Arabic being produced, the number of downloads, the time spent, the engagement, just the consumption of podcasts has really increased in Arabic. And I think, I would say that I really don't think it's a rejection at all of kind of Western or, English or other languages. I think it's really, there was a huge gap. And, people like us Rising Giants, Studio Jamhoor, and Kerning Cultures and others, we recognized that, opportunity and said, listen, there is a lack of high quality Arabic content. And this is where we want to focus. And so for us, that was, has been our guiding light for the last, 4 or 5 years. We're changing that now, that strategy slightly. We're not trying to produce as much as we can and produce in many different verticals. We're really trying to build out different, be a bit more specific and strategic in what kind of content we produce. But I really think, Arabic language, first of all, there's a big opportunity. There's a lot of people that listen. And I think if brands specifically and companies want to engage the local population, you need to speak in their language. And so I think, obviously a far majority of people in the region speak Arabic as their first language. Probably the exception would be maybe UAE and some of the other Gulf capitals where maybe there's a larger expat population. But I think, there's a huge need. And I think people like us, the smaller podcast networks in the region are filling that gap.
Excellent. I thank you. That's absolutely great to see, and good to see that kind of upward trajectory as well, with a bit of diversification of content. As you say, it's not that people are rejecting different types of podcasts, it's more that they're a complement, and it's just that, I think, excitement about listening to different forms of audio in local language delivered by people that are from the region that speak the same. And Greg, just to sort of build on Ramzi's point there, what type of podcasts are people listening to in Arabic? I know you do a lot around the storytelling piece. Is it that kind of the heritage of that kind of oral sort of storytelling culture, with those stories getting passed down through generations that are then getting a bit of a modern twist? What is it that Arabic consumers are listening to?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks so much for having us here. It's a real pleasure. And to piggyback off of what Ramzi's saying, I mean, I'm a big fan of Sawt, big fan of Abe. And I think beyond kind of podcasts and Arabic, what we have stories that need to be told. And what we have is people telling them. Podcast is the medium, and Arabic is obviously one language, but it could just as well be in other languages. And what we're seeing here is we're seeing kind of us as Arabs. I mean, I'm a native Arabic speaker. I was born and raised in Syria, and I'm Western educated, kind of yearning for the kind of content that we're used to at NPR, at a Radio Lab level, at a 99% Invisible, but aren't getting. And so it came kind of out of scratching that itch. And because I guess podcast as a medium is kind of nascent and young in the region, that kind of gave us an opportunity to tell stories that need to be told in a way that is convenient and as close to the listener as possible. As a podcast, I mean, when you have kind of content creators and you have listeners, when there's as little in between these two cohorts, the better. That leads to better quality content. That leads to kind of more direct feedback, and that leads to kind of a nicer conversation. The more layers there are, kind of often things become plain vanilla ice cream, and I don't know about you, but I don't like plain vanilla ice cream. And so the kind of content that we focus on is content that needs to be are basically stories that need to be told, whether they're conversational or interview. I think it varies by show. And what we're seeing a high, I mean, probably more demand than we have ever seen before from places like Saudi, like Egypt, from places where people have a high propensity for conversations that are kind of shifting from taboo to less taboo. And I think we have 2 shows, and Sawt has a few that kind of touch on this, and it's just kind of tapping into consumers or listeners' ears initially, and maybe eventually eyeballs, that in a way that makes them part of the conversation, and makes them feel seen. I think that is the difference. Traditional media kind of would have a difficult time connecting with listeners directly in as kind of a transparent way. But because podcasts, I guess, are digitally native, they're convenient, they're kind of, they fit into a more modern lifestyle. then it becomes easier to both tell stories, but also more importantly, have these conversations on words. We have a Slack channel where we just kind of collect listener reviews and listener feedback and whatnot. And it really is, it's super personal. It's thank you for telling this story. This brings me back a story that my mother told me about her grandmother. And we get to have this dialogue, whether it's through Instagram or Twitter or many of the other channels. So it really is a special time for podcasts, full stop, but it's an even more special time for podcasts in Arabic and in the Middle East.
Brilliant. No, I love that. And I love the fact that this is the storytelling piece, and it's just kind of connecting people with it in a different way. And I mean, in terms of that, like in terms of the audiences that are consuming podcasts, I know Ramzy through some of his podcasts, it could be a little bit more controversial with some of the topics and subject matters that you talk about, you know, because you're outside perhaps the traditional media. Podcasts are not regulated yet. So we can be a little bit more, sort of, I guess, brash with some of the things that are covered and covering and getting into areas and perhaps topics that people want to talk about, but perhaps they don't necessarily have the current outlets to do so with traditional media. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean,
sorry,
who was that for? Go ahead, Greg.
Please go ahead. I've said enough.
I was no. We want to hear more. I think. I mean, just quickly. I think for us, you know, Ayyub is definitely targeted at. So Ayyub is a show that, you know, talks about gender and sexuality, and that is something that is difficult to talk about in any region of the world, I think. And so what we did is we found a topic that is difficult to talk about and a format that really worked well, and we merged those two, and that's kind of where that idea came from. And so, you know, if you try to get someone to talk about, you know, something very sensitive with cameras and whatnot, it can be difficult, even for someone very well practiced. And so audio works really well for that. I think, you know, at the very beginning, there was definitely this idea of we need to create attractive media. Us at SOLT, at least, we were very interested in important topics and kind of examining our world. And like I said, at the beginning, we thought that, you know, at the very beginning, there wasn't that much content. So we kind of had free range. We could do whatever we wanted. There was tons of space to be experimental. If, you know, when we started Ayyub, it was basically the first show about that. When we started Dumtak, there's almost no other music show. Even to this day, there's only a handful. So I think, you know, at the very beginning, there was this wide open space that we could kind of explore and be the first, or you know, try to be the best at something without a lot of competition. You know, in the last couple of years, as more and more people join that space, I think that dynamic changes, and you see different studios kind of specialize a bit more. So, you know, some people are focusing on sports, some people are on fiction. Like I said, we're very interested in the storytelling, the narrative driven content for more of a premium audience. And I think that bodes well for the listeners and for the format, but also for the brands and for the organizations that are interested in using audio as a way to communicate to their audience. We heard, you know, some of the panelists in the previous panel talk about using sounds and music. You know, that's, you know, for us, creating that sonic experience is really important. You want to capture their attention, and you know, that's really your only method. And so you really have to do it really well, or you're going to lose them. You're going to lose them from the beginning.
Absolutely. And Greg, sorry, did you want to add something to that?
No, I think. I mean, Ramzy put it perfectly. Yeah.
No worries. Well, yeah, that was an interesting point to see, and I think with the platform for Arabic podcasts becoming a way for people to consume content in different ways, I guess that the different topics that can be talked about within that, and it's trying different formats, and it's interesting, I think, just from a cultural perspective, to see how, when it comes to Arabic podcasts, is the format, you know, if it is storytelling, if you look at different cultures, you tend to see different formats kind of favoring quite well. Like I know, for example, in China, very much they're used to kind of podcasts behind a paywall. that is the default. That is how people are consuming content, content over there. When you think about South Korea, actually another big podcast market, a lot of people in South Korea consume podcasts for educational purposes. So that is the direct reason they're listening to learn. If you look at the kind of big markets of the UK and the US, there's a trend at the moment for the audio visual format as well. So it's interesting to see the kind of different formats that are performing well in different kind of cultures and different markets and how they transcend. But when it comes to kind of storytelling, and then thinking about this session being for a lot of communicators and advertisers, do you think Arabic consumers want to hear from brands when it comes to storytelling-led podcasts? Do you think that consumers are open to kind of podcasts from brands in Arabic content, which include that kind of storytelling narrative? I'll open that to both Ramzy and Greg to chip in.
I'm happy to chime in here. I think it's as with any medium, as with any channel that broadcasts content, how brands fit into that, I think is key. And I think the mistake that we see a lot of brands and kind of agencies kind of do with podcasts is they treat it as radio, but kind of like online. So they kind of take ads that would otherwise air on radio that are very kind of one-dimensional without any kind of real call to action or any kind of real relevance beyond the obvious to the content of the show, and they just kind of like port that over to podcasts. And with that, we see like very little success, because you're kind of speaking a different language you're kind of disrespecting the listener. And with on the other side, some of the biggest spenders in the world in podcast advertising, what they do really, really well is they kind of tell their story to the specific audience of the show that they're advertising on, and they tie that into a specific call to action. And there can be a whole number of those, whether it's a custom URL or it's some kind of incentive. They kind of track a return on that. And we've had both experiences. We've worked with great advertisers that really know what they're doing in terms of kind of crafting a story, kind of really kind of giving us the freedom to do what we do best, which is tell stories, but we want to tell their stories to the listener. And we've had advertisers who kind of have a very kind of old school, let's call it radio approach, where they just kind of want to broadcast and it's a one-sided conversation. And it's tricky. And I think incorporating brands is more an art than a science, because it really requires kind of both editorial judgments. You have to kind of align those. At the same time, you have to be telling that story in a way that is concise and that does it justice. And obviously, if a brand doesn't belong somewhere, then it doesn't belong somewhere. So having the courage to say no, I think, is important here. Yeah.
I can follow up on that. I just, I think if we think about podcasts as existing in this ecosystem of media, I remember for someone on the previous panel was saying, audio has been moving up, and if you look at it as omni-channel, multiple channels at the same time, and depending on what your message is and what you're trying to get people to do, you can use audio in a very specific and very effective way. As we know, people think it's more trustworthy. It's great for, brand recognition. I wonder, how good it is for like call to actions and getting people to use codes and whatnot to buy things and that. But I think, that's a really important part of something that we have to experiment. The idea of radio advertising and kind of being out of shape or out of form for podcast is funny, because if you look at the history of radio advertising, right, it was basically you have to talk really loud as quickly as possible to fit in as much as you can in 30 seconds, right, or 15 seconds or 20 seconds or whatever it was. Usually it was in blocks of 30. So I think, if you look at that tradition as opposed, and compare it to video, where, Chanel or someone would spend millions of dollars creating a video ad that would go out on TV. It would be played in front of movie screens and whatnot. So I think, for us to kind of create that creative, innovative storytelling for advertisers, we really need to think in a different way and definitely drop the old kind of radio way and think about it as a new digital format that works in an ecosystem. It lives within an ecosystem of other media. And with the internet and with different advertising technologies, we can see kind of who is listening to what and responding in what ways, and we can build a very interesting package that's very effective.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's super interesting. And I think from our side, when we speak to brands about they're wanting to sort of get into podcasting, sort of dipping their toe in the water, as I think the team said on the previous panel, it is a little bit new. It's still people are still finding their way from a brand perspective. There seems to be I think a need to have bravery to produce, which I think is there, but also the bravery and the commitment on the promotion of that. You can have the best podcast in the world, but if you don't tell people about that, will it be sort of very effective? So I think a lot of the conversations we have with brands is kind of having that bravery through both. You're still an innovator, you're still kind of the first people sort of really pushing this kind of new or not so new medium, but there's a real opportunity, I think, on the promotional side. So and I wanted to talk about the promotional bit a little bit. So when you have these kind of great sort of podcast series, how do you go about sort of telling people about it? How do you sort of advertise them? How do you promote them? Perhaps Ramsey, if I turn to you first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think if you look at it in different ways, for us, really, the marketing is a big focus for us, obviously, because we want to have a big piece of that pie, but we also want to make that pie bigger. So we need to reach, obviously you can address people who are already listening to podcasts, but we want to get more people to listen to podcasts. So we think about it in a couple of different ways. I mean, also for the strategic purposes, we haven't mentioned subscription or whatnot. Subscription services are really big right now because people don't want to listen to advertising. And so there is that kind of balance that we need to hold. For us, really, we create a marketing plan that starts at the very beginning of the production cycle. And so that kind of journey to production, at the very beginning, it starts with marketing. I'm trained in rhetoric, and so the first question you always ask is, who is the audience? Like, who are you trying to reach? And so kind of starting at that point, you can start figuring out which tools, which channels, in what ways. Obviously there's social media, but we at SOLT have been looking at a lot of different ways and trying to get out of just kind of the, blast them on Twitter, blast them on Instagram, blast them on Facebook type methodology, and look outside that. Obviously, we've been working with content creators, influencers, and I think it's been really important, maybe a bit slower, but I feel like it respects the listener a bit more. We do a lot of in-person events, listening parties all over the region. We bring people together physically, and we're planning a series of live events in the fall, which hopefully, with the COVID situation and travel kind of coming back online, that will be possible. But we think, bringing people together physically to kind of celebrate is a really effective way of getting people, because then they can share. And also looking at other stuff, obviously there's the new social media, sharing things on Twitter and Telegram and whatnot. So, sorry, WhatsApp, not Twitter.
And I think that's interesting. You mentioned about the listening parties as well, and actually think I remember having a similar conversation with Heber Fisher, actually, Greg, about some of the listening parties and how people are actually coming together to listen to podcasts. I think traditionally you think of podcasts as quite a sort of solitary experience. You're kind of just plugging in, you're just you and you're kind of listening on your mobile perhaps, and having that kind of connection with the host or the story that you're listening to. But it's interesting to see that the different ways to promote.
Completely. I mean, are listening parties as scalable as podcasts could be? No, but what they do is they kind of give a chance to, let's call them kind of the super fans, people who are really excited about a certain show or basically a certain kind of content, to get together and just basically share that experience and be really mindful in their listening. Very often you might be listening to podcasts and multitasking, maybe driving, maybe at the treadmill or whatnot. But so I think kind of a listening party gives kind of the opposite experience, where you're really intentionally listening to something which has an almost meditative atmosphere to it. Yeah.
Definitely, and that's good to see. When we touched a bit about, I think you mentioned, Greg, about brands thinking sometimes as podcasts as sort of radio online, and they need to sort of get a little bit out of that mindset and see them in a different way. But I think the opportunity with podcasts, you can speak to very specific, very kind of targeted audiences, but with very minimal wastage that you might, perhaps if you're thinking more about traditional media, there'll be a lot of people that perhaps you are tuning in that might really not be on target. But with the podcast, you're not an accidental listener. You are listening at the point of interest. You have already got an investment in that subject matter up until that point that you click, you sort of see the podcast, and then it's up to, I guess, the content to kind of keep you on there. Are you sort of finding, Greg, that with your podcast that they're resonating with different age brackets more on an Arabic side? Is it sort of more skewed towards younger listeners, or what are you sort of seeing in terms of the trends of listenership when it comes to Arabic-based podcasts?
Absolutely. So I think when it comes to age, I think there's an interesting kind of conversation behind that, because we don't specifically look at age. We look at like listener cohorts, and I think for a long time our biggest listener cohort was women in Arab-speaking women in the Gulf. We had a few shows that kind of became super popular in Saudi in particularly because of the nature of the conversations that they were showcasing and highlighting. So we basically had a really strong foothold with women in the Gulf, so when we're in a situation like that, well, we could do one of two things. We could kind of create more content that caters to that specific audience, which is convenient and it's easy, and which is something that we have done. And but at the same time, it's important to diversify. So and when you want to diversify audiences, you have the cold start problem when you're kind of just starting from scratch. How do you build an audience? And for that, we've looked at creators with pre-existing audiences on other platforms. We have a podcast called Podcast Ilmi Jiddan with a creator from Egypt, and he makes science fun, and he does that on YouTube, and he's been doing that for many years. And so we started having a conversation on what that could look like in a podcast form. It's not just taking the show as it is and kind of transposing it in a podcast medium. It's kind of creating a story arc which kind of complements the show on a podcast, and we've had tremendous success with that. So it's the first part's kind of the first and very difficult part is kind of creating demand for something from a specific audience group, and then kind of doubling down on kind of content that they would find interesting by testing, iterating. And then the second part is kind of targeting different audience groups by either approaching those with pre-existing audiences, which is an obvious thing to do, or kind of taking the longer view approach of kind of starting from scratch and building an audience through the many ways that we know how, whether it's on social and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's good with that sounds like an amazing podcast series as well. It reminded me of one that we've been doing at the moment, and it's working with a management consultancy firm, and they really want to tap into the kind of trend around esports. So the whole series was built around esports, and it was great because you were able to deliver a very specific, super targeted podcast that just spoke to a very particular audience that were interested in that subject matter. And then the ways to promote, I think, are quite sort of powerful, promoting with the guests that are on the podcast. Obviously you've got your advertising routes. You can we do a lot of transcripts of the podcast too, that we can then create press releases and op-eds from a kind of PR angle too. So it seems to be lots of opportunities on that side. Ramzy, did you have anything to add in terms of how you're sort of working your podcast series hard across different platforms?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Greg was saying, I think, we look at user personas, and so it's kind of like design thinking perspective, and each show we really have to think of each show as kind of its separate brand, and each show has multiple user personas. It's got, kind of the primary, secondary, and whatnot. And so each show, we really have to look at it differently. We have a couple of shows recently. We did a show, we were looking at Egypt as kind of an opportunity, and we were like, okay, what doesn't exist already? There's just a couple of comedy shows, so let's do a comedy show in Egypt. And we worked with a content, creator and influencer when we looked at people to work with, we found people who were already working, doing interesting content. And so it wasn't a big jump for them kind of, to create audio. And so that works really well. And we think, working with, different content creators is a great way to do that. I think obviously too, working with the platforms, and Rami, Apple, Spotify and others, I think are really important, as because most of us, almost everybody, uses those platforms to distribute. So that's a key part of the marketing mix as well. And for the most part, they've been very supportive and very helpful, all those platforms. And then I think the other kind of main way is to get other existing podcast listeners to listen. So doing cross promotion, we've done cross promotion with a lot of different networks, and we're just going into a big cycle right now of cross promotion. And so I think, like I said, kind of making that pie a lot bigger. But again, we're at the very early stage of that. I think as the market matures, as the ecosystem develops, as we see how other media kind of work together, we'll really see that kind of takeoff moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking with the cross promotion platform, that's a great one. And then thinking about how you can use existing podcasts that already have their kind of established following, they've already got that established present in market, then to use them to actually leverage that following. There's something we're doing with When Women Win at the moment, but obviously that's on all the Emirates flights. It's one of a big kind of podcasts. It's very much kind of got a good heritage now, and that's a great one because we're tapping into that audience for a new podcast. So people will think, all right, if I like that type of content, I'll be interested in something else. So yeah, great to kind of to use those existing ones. You mentioned, Ramzy, a bit about looking at Egypt and different markets. You mentioned the comedy piece as well, and we found from our research comedy podcast and that resonates quite well, especially in this region. It tends to perform very well as one of the kind of top genres alongside the kind of sort of news based but entertainment based, but comedy always seems to be up there. But when it comes to kind of different sort of markets in the region that are really kind of pushing or bubbling away when it comes to podcasting, I know we have UAE, and obviously you're based in Jordan, Ramzy. What sort of markets are we seeing that are really kind of consuming podcasts? Is there any ones that we should be watching out for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question, and I think you see different trends in different countries kind of coming online, and I think there's a couple things that have happened that in the last 5 to 10 years with the internet really is that I don't think it's less important. I'm going to contradict myself in a second, but I think people will listen to all accents quite easily. But at the same time, they really enjoy their own accent. So I think this kind of regional idea for us, we're definitely, working regionally. Our biggest audience, our 3-4 biggest audiences are outside Jordan. And those are our focus. But what we've identified as in another kind of strategic layer is that we are looking at other countries that are kind of big populations, young people, maybe not particularly monetizable right now in that sense where you can sell ads or whatnot, but they have big populations, and we can kind of build up the system, brick by brick from the beginning, from the start. So I think obviously the usual countries are, KSA, UAE, you look at Egypt is probably, a huge, and I would say one of the least developed in podcasts, actually. I mean, it's shocking that there's quite a few, but for the scale of the audience, I think there's kind of an undeveloped opportunity there. And we're also looking at other countries that we think, again, are emerging, so obviously KSA and the Gulf, in general, but then you look at Egypt, Iraq, Algeria, Morocco, You know, in the North Africa puts a whole different spin on it. You can do it in Arabic, you can do it in French too, and get a lot of, you know, the French speaking that are from those countries, but maybe live in Europe and whatnot. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that. What we're trying to do is do it in kind of a two-way grid system. So you have kind of countries on one side, so you have geographic opportunities. So, you know, let's say Iraq or Egypt or KSA, and then you have, you know, subjects on kind of on a different axis. And that's how we did, you know, it's like Egypt. Okay, what can we do in Egypt? We looked at the different things and we said, you know, Egypt is a great country to work in. What should we do there? Comedy. So Egypt comedy, you know, made a lot of sense, and that show has done exceptionally well. We're so happy with it. And, you know, hopefully we're going to be doing a lot more like that. The other thing I wanted to say about that is if you look at the charts across the world, right? If you look at the charts, true crime is probably #1 in the most markets. It's absolutely insane. And so we just launched a new show called Ahraz, and it's an investigative show that takes, you know, important crimes or important issues that have happened and proposes them in a true crime kind of way. You know, it's a bit dramatic. You know, we're very true to kind of the journalistic principles. But, you know, if you look at what spurred kind of the second wave of podcasts, it was a true crime show that really, you know, went viral for the first time and everybody was talking about it. So I think true crime is something that in the region we haven't, you know, maybe less so for marketing and advertisers. But even so, I think, you know, the opportunity to reach a diverse audience across the region is really powerful.
Absolutely, I'd agree with that. I remember the first podcast series I massively binged on was Serial. So yeah, that was a testament to the true crime piece. And Greg, do you sort of, what's your sort of thoughts around that? Are you seeing kind of different genres of podcasts that you do at Kerning Cultures that are performing particularly well in different markets, or how are you seeing the appetite for podcasting in the region?
Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think it's one of those questions that will always, as long as there's content being created, there will always be that question. We're gonna have more tools and more kind of analytics and more, you know, tools at our disposal to get, you know, more insights. But this question of kind of what content to create will always be there. And for us, it comes down to a number of things. So it kind of comes down to things that we as a team are excited about, and for us to be excited about something, we have to be kind of keenly observing the present. And we're at a time right now, we have kind of an explosion in the number of podcasts that are coming up in both, you know, the Middle East and also the world, but also in Arabic. And I think it's definitely an interesting time, and it's a great time. And so at the flip side of that, we thought that now is a great time to kind of get into podcasts that are more mindful and meditative. So we have a few coming out. We just re-released one called Sukoon, which is basically a meditative kind of podcast, and then we're coming out with two more over the next year, which basically fuse kind of our audio team's kind of sound engineering and just kind of futuristic kind of cinematic audio, you know, soundscapes with a meditative kind of audio that helps the listener kind of zoom out and slow down a little bit. So this is one thing that we're super excited about, and then just basically telling stories in other verticals to audiences that we aren't reaching now. There's you know, a whole, you know, cohort beyond, you know, millennials or young people that aren't being communicated to. So I think expanding our cooking show, we have a cooking podcast, which is really less about cooking and more about kind of people gathering around food to share an experience, and that lends itself quite nicely to audio, and it's growing quite nicely during Ramadan, where people are fasting, but I guess they're still thinking about food sometimes. And they tune in to that. It's called Kuzbera, which is yeah.
Amazing. That's interesting. And you mentioned about the Ramadan piece there, Greg. Do you think that the podcast listenership it varies during Ramadan. I know that there's a sort of Netflix effect, and podcasts sometimes are called the Netflix of the audio world, and we see, I think there's a lot of rising figures of people consuming or watching a lot more on-demand content during Ramadan. Do you think the kind of consumption of podcasts is affected during Ramadan? Do you think more people are listening?
Absolutely. So I think, we've just written a post about this on our site, but I mean, so basically, you have kind of the more conservative Muslims who stop listening to music altogether. 76% of I guess like audiences stop listening to music altogether, and that brings that brings an opportunity for them to shift into podcasts. So from our numbers, we see a 20% rise in consumption basically during this month, and that is because people have a lot of time. People are kind of not listening to music, and I think both these things are interesting headwinds in this month. And the challenge obviously is to create content that is interesting to those who are tuning in, whether it's new listeners or old listeners, kind of engaging in during the month.
Brilliant. Now that's really interesting. Wow, those stats are incredible. So good to see the kind of appetite there, and that the listener habits are shifting and changing during different times of the year. That's really fascinating. I didn't know that. So and I thought, well, now I'm almost to the end of the session, but one thing I wanted to do to sort of talk a bit about, I guess there's been a trend globally for kind of, especially amongst younger people, for shorter, more sort of snackable content, the Insta stories, the quick kind of 15-second video content, and we see the kind of power of YouTube as well, globally as well, in terms of, I think it is one of the fastest growing platforms to consume audio content on. With in terms of what you both do with creating very kind of quite highly produced, often very immersive podcast experiences, how can you sort of tap into this trend? How can you kind of tap into the trend for the audio visual, noting that some podcasts are video driven? Do you think there's an opportunity to transition into that space?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we definitely work, we've done more and more video. If you would have asked me at the beginning, are you pivoting to video? Like, absolutely not. And we're still not. Our name is, Sound and Salt. So I think, we're pretty hyper focused on audio for as our main kind of product. That being said, video is an extremely important part of the media ecosystem. People consume a lot of video, so we need to be on there. I think the race to the short can be, there's many ways to look at that. I think you don't have to just go short. I think on demand has really exposed a lot of kind of insecurities, whether you're insecure about your content or not. In some ways, like if it's good enough to deserve 45 minutes or an hour and a half, then why not? But I think the situation definitely has push things shorter. What we've done in different ways is we stick to kind of a 20 to 40 minute window, and that's what we propose for the most part. For new shows, we do things that are longer. We've done a lot that's shorter. The shorter stuff definitely does well. What we did with one show is we have a weekly news show. It's an explainer show that covers the region, and that show has done well for us, and we're really happy with it. And it comes out at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning, most of the Arab world's first day of the week. But what we did with that show is in the middle of the week, we started producing a shorter version that kind of hits a trend, is a bit lighter, and looks at something kind of not always kind of lighter, but it's like a short kind of quick trend meme type episode. And we've noticed that has done really well too. So I think, again, there's many personas. It's a diverse, it's a rich, culturally, historically rich kind of region that we live in. And so I think there's a lot of people that are interested in shorter, quick stuff. And then there's people that are interested in longer, more kind of thoughtful. And so I think depending on the audience, depending on the content too. It's hard to have a really good conversation, in 3 minutes. It's a lot easier to kind of get into the details and pick apart different ideas in 45, an hour, and an hour and a half. So I think, there's a lot of space for us at Salt. We're interested in, that the storytelling. We're interested in kind of creating stuff that fits into your day while respecting the listener's intelligence and their time. And I think we see that people, if it's good, people will listen to it. If it's not good, they'll shut it off pretty quickly.
Absolutely brilliant. And Greg, do you have anything to add to that one?
We haven't quite ventured into video, but it's obviously on our mind, and it's obviously something that we want to do and we want to do well. And I think the challenge here isn't as easy as it seemed in terms of just like putting cameras, whether it's obviously, we want to be thoughtful about it, we want to be intentional about it, and we want to kind of bring the same kind of, production standards that we bring to audio, that we bring to video. So something that is definitely on our radar, and that we definitely want to get into, whether it's through, working with a partner who's really, really good at that, or building that kind of expertise in house. But it's definitely on our mind, and to kind of, I guess retweet what Ramzy said. It's kind of it's a respect for the listener. It's a respect for the listener. And if you have content that you're proud to stand behind that could have a life in video, then it's definitely something worth investing in. And it's definitely, if it would add to the listener experience, and we have a few shows that would, and a few shows that wouldn't, and it's important to be honest about that, and to kind of take that in a thoughtful way.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And we're almost out of time, but yeah, that was really interesting to talk on that. And a very final quick question I just wanted to ask, just quickly with I guess we've seen Alexa now back end of last year, now coming here with Arabic and English as part of the Amazon Alexa piece. Lots of stuff happening in terms of voice-driven podcasts. What is it that you're most excited about when it comes to podcasting, Arabic podcasting in particular, over the next year? Ramzy, I just go to you.
Yeah, that's great. No, I think there's, like I said, at the beginning, we're just at that point, we're taxiing out to the runway. And I think there's still so much space and so much opportunity. I think what I'm really excited about is having, more shows, more diversity of shows for more regions of the Arab world. I think we're going to see a lot more in the industry. I think we're going to see a little bit of consolidation. I think to get to that kind of takeoff point, we need some of the groups to come together. And so I think I've been saying that for a couple of years, but I think we're almost there. And then I think we're going to see more. We're seeing young people consume more audio than other age brackets, and I think that as they grow up and as that population kind of ages a little bit, we'll see more people join the audio. And I think for us as consumers, we need as producers, we need to be producing really good audio that is speaking to people about their lives and about what's happening in their everyday. So I think those are some of the trends. I would say, there was a question about the metaverse and whatnot. I think there's definitely space there. I don't think we quite know either in audio or in even what the metaverse is really about yet. But I think we'll see definitely some experimentations there, particularly with kind of natural language processing, NLP, and machine learning and whatnot. There's already been some big advances over the last couple months and years. So I think we'll see a lot more of that as we go forward.
Wow, incredible. Thank you. And Greg, same question to you.
Absolutely. So what I'm looking forward to the most is kind of seeing kind of the real world implications of all this kind of energy that we're seeing in the podcast space. It's something that we've seen in other parts of the world, and digital media, podcasts, and a lot of similar mediums can be kind of canaries in the coal mine for a generational shift, for being wanted to be communicated to in a more direct and honest way. There's a reason that none of the kind of large incumbents, media conglomerates have had any success with the types of content that require a real ear on the ground and a real kind of sensitivity to what listeners want. There's a reason for that. And I think what I'm excited about is seeing this energy translate into real world positive consequences, taking kind of the same thoughtfulness, the same kind of bravery and courage that a lot of these primarily independent creators or independent companies are kind of taking on, and seeing how that translates into the real world, whether it's in social change and political change, and have that be kind of a manifestation of the kind of region that we'd like to live and work in and thrive in.
Excellent. Well, thank you to you both. It's great chatting to you. I really enjoyed it. And thanks, Austin.
Thank you so much for that, guys. Thank you, Cheryl from Marketeers. Thank you, Ramsey from South. And thank you, Greg from Kerning Cultures. Obviously, South and Kerning Cultures are two big podcast networks. And Cheryl, one of the things that Cheryl slightly undersold herself on is that Marketeers does some amazing research into podcasting in the region. So if you want some really good up-to-date numbers, reach out to Cheryl. I'm sorry we didn't have more time. There's always so much more to say. But you can reach out to these guys anyway. So on social and things. I've learned a lot, and I hope you have too. I'm really envious of Arabic content out there. So I loved Ramsey's metaphor of podcasting as being like a plane about to take off. And as Greg said, it's about getting as close to your audience as possible and figuring out how to do that, brands and podcasters alike. So I'm certainly going to be keeping my ears open for more changes to come in the coming weeks, coming months, and coming years. Thanks again to all our panelists from both panels. And again, they're fairly easy to find on social media and so on, so do reach out to them. I'm looking forward to seeing how brands will work with podcasts and audio in the future. Maybe, I don't know, sponsored listening parties. Nice. Yeah, keep watching Campaign for more about audio and radio and podcasts and all things media, marketing and advertising through our many channels, including our own podcast available on Anghami. Thanks again to our sponsor, DMS. Couldn't do it without you guys. And from me, Austin Allison, and the team at Campaign Middle East, thanks a lot to all of you for attending. And until next time, keep your ears open, Ramadan Kareem, and stay safe. Goodbye.